So with that, I'd like to sort of carry on this afternoon and move forward. We've got a whole lineup of great speakers to kick off, and we obviously have the emergence of Anthony again later on. Are you turning?
Absolutely.
Are you turning that into a
Absolutely.
podcast as well?
What's that?
This afternoon's panel?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, just checking. Right, with that, I'd like to invite Jamie to come to the stage and take over, and then we'll go into a panel event. Jamie is obviously the president of MTA Construction and Development, and looking at the sort of the synopsis he's given me, I think it's going to be quite an interesting presentation, 10 minutes. So it's all yours, Jamie.
All
Please.
right, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Can you hear me okay? My mic just fell off, and I don't know if I reattached it properly. Am I okay? I can't tell if maybe I'm supposed to flip it around this way. Maybe I will do that. A little higher? Okay. Yeah, makes sense. It's a technology innovation here. You have some expertise?
Yes, sir.
All right, good. All right, thank you. Okay, that's just for appearance's sake. It's good to see you all. This seems like a great conference, and I'm interested in mostly in the panel discussion we're going to have. I also see some familiar faces, and this sort of happens in cycles. I've been on a bit of a wave of speaking to groups. So Julie probably heard all this a couple days ago, probably a few others. But I'm glad to be here. And my colleague Quamel Arroyo is here, who's our Chief Accessibility Officer. We work very closely together. I know you heard from him before lunch. So I run that agency, the Construction and Development Agency at the MTA. We have 5 agencies at the MTA. 4 of them are operating agencies. New York City Transit runs the subways and the buses. Definitely for sure the biggest system in North America. We carry 5 million people a day. We have Long Island Railroad and Metro North, the 2 biggest commuter railroads in North America, and then we run 7 bridges and 2 tunnels in our Bridges and Tunnels organization. Q and I celebrated the 75th anniversary of the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, now known as the Hugh Carey Tunnel, last night. And then what we did was we were concerned, and the public was concerned, about our ability to deliver capital, including a lot of technology in the system, better, faster, and cheaper. So in 2019, we created a 5th agency at the MTA, Construction and Development, and we have all of it, soup to nuts, under our control. We start by doing a needs assessment of what we need to do in the system. That's our planning group, and they also think big picture innovatively about how we can do things better, how we can manage service better and put on service better and improve the customer experience. Then we have a capital plan that's created by our budget and program management group. That's the development part of it. They figure out how to package it. Very important in our system. Money's important, but almost more important is outages, because we're a 24/7 system. So figuring out how to bundle projects together so we can get things done within the system is a really critical upfront planning thing that we do. Then we contract, we do the procurement. We've done a lot of innovative procurement in the last few years, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. We get lots of benefits out of having a very innovative contracts group, and then a project is awarded and it goes to our delivery group, who make sure that it gets built on time and on budget. And increasingly, we're hitting those targets. So that's what we do at the agency. I will just say, sort of, backing up and thinking about infrastructure, next generation of infrastructure for New Yorkers. We are a $1.5 trillion system. We carry 5 million people a day. It's just an enormous, complicated system. And I know, as a frequent rider of the system, well before I worked at the MTA, we have this sort of very funny inversion or cognitive dissonance where if you don't work at the MTA, you ride the subway system, and if the countdown clock is off by 2 minutes, or you're stuck in between stations for a minute or two, particularly if you're in a busy train, it's totally outrageous and unacceptable, right? But when you work at the MTA, like the very notion that the trains pull into the stations, it's a miracle in a lot of ways. And Michelle, can we keep that off the record? Is that all right? Although I did say it to Winnie Hu, and she had a sort of partial quote of that. But the point is that it's just that the number of different things that have to come together in order for us to put on service is just unbelievable in an old system and one of this complexity, one that is to a great degree in disrepair because we simply have a decay in the quality of the 6 million component assets that we have within that system. So what is the solution to that? Well, there's a few of them, but from my perspective and from the perspective of what we do, it's capital investment. And that's, all of you work in various fields where that capital investment is the thing that allows you to keep things in a state of good repair and at the same time to modernize them. So just briefly on what we're doing, we work in 5-year capital programs. This last program, $55 billion, about a third of it was funded by the congestion relief charge. It's been a major investment, huge increase, almost double the investment of the prior 5-year capital programs, and we've made lots of investment. But just last week, the state legislature funded the gap in our new 5-year capital program, 2025 to 2029 program. That's now $68.4 billion over 5 years. And it's absolutely critically needed for a system of our size. In fact, we had a few independent looks at this as we were developing it. JP Morgan looked at it, for example, and said that if we were trying to bring our system to a state of good repair, we needed more like $22 billion a year, which if you take, that gets to something like $110 billion over 5 years. We got $68.4 billion. We know we can do quite a lot with that, and we're going to be very successful with it. But what it is 90% of it is state of good repair investment. So we'll talk about that after. We're interested in expanding the system. We have cool projects like the Interborough Express. They're very important. But 90% of that investment is critical state of good repair, just to list a few things off. And when we're doing state of good repair work, we are modernizing for the customer as well as we replace things. Frequent and reliable service, we're going to order 2,000 new rail cars to allow us to retire the 1980s fleet of rail cars that are now at the end of their useful life. We're modernizing the signals, or some of you are involved in this, CBTC, communication-based train control. We've done it we now have it up and running on 4 lines, and we're going to do 75 more miles of it, of our 700-mile system in the next 5-year plan. That's a huge modernization for reliability and frequency. We are protecting our Grand Central Artery, which is the train shed underneath Park Avenue. It's Grand Central itself. It's the viaduct up at 125th Street. We're making a massive investment, and Q, I know, was talking about a P3 that we did for ADA accessibility. We also have a different form of public-private partnership with the building owners who are redeveloping under the East Midtown rezoning. So JP Morgan Chase, as they build their new headquarters, have actually rebuilt the train shed for us surrounding their headquarters, and we're very close to another deal for them to expand the amount of work that they're doing as they redevelop more buildings, and expecting other developers to come in and participate with us on that as well. But in addition to safe, reliable, and frequent service, we are really improving the customer experience. And I know that that's when we talk about technology in a system, I think that's very important. And just broadly, if you think about where we're headed with that experience, we already have made a huge amount of progress, but we have a lot more to do. So today, versus even 10 years ago, you can sit in your apartment or your home and know when the next train is coming. If you live close to 2 different lines, you can figure out if you should go take that line or that line, through the information that gets fed into the app. Then you get to the station. As you enter the station, we are making the station ADA accessible. We have made a commitment to do that for 95% of our stations by 2055. We've gotten 43 stations made ADA accessible, 43 stations since 2020. Out of our 472 stations, that is a 4 or 5 times increase in the pace. And we have about 45 in construction right now, working very closely with Q and his team on accessibility. These are enormous projects because you have to really bring a station to a state of good repair in order to install an elevator, the equipment, the machinery, the power, make the platform accessible, deal with a whole lot of different elements, the stairs, right? So we're doing all of that to improve the customer experience. So you can use an elevator or an ADA accessible staircase to get down to the fare gates. We have Omni, contactless tap and go. It's fully implemented, not just for regular riders of our system. That's been done for a few years, but every different group that uses our system, reduced fare, paratransit riders, students, they all now can use Omni and can do it very soon with a virtual card in their Apple Wallet, but you can also just use your bank card now. So that's a huge innovation. We're modernizing the fare gates. We have $1.1 billion to do that. That is much overdue. Those turnstiles are many decades old, and they don't provide the benefits of accessibility for people who need it through a wide aisle gate, but whether they're a person with disabilities or they're hauling luggage or they have a stroller, we all know this. But in addition to that, that's the key in the long term to dealing with the fare evasion problem that we have in our system. And we're in the midst of it. We have 4 vendors who are producing prototype gates. We're going to install them in 20 stations this year, 20 stations next year. I've been running around looking at some of their prototype gates, actually going and breaking them myself so that they can see how difficult it is. These gates seem to make it work in almost every other system in the world, and yet we know that New Yorkers are very tough. So we're pushing hard, and so we're modernizing the fare gate. Then you get into the station, down to the platform. Here's where the station of the future is being built. And you all know a lot of this sits on the backbone of fiber optic cable, which we have to install, or we have installed and we have to improve. But controlling a set of systems, the countdown clocks, the customer information screens, the help point, and then all of our back of house systems for ventilation, fire safety, all of this equipment is being modernized and connected to each other. So if we're talking about an Internet of Things, this is a great prototype of that. We have $800 million to do that as we do our station work, which is much bigger budget, $10 billion of station work budget. And our intention is to go and pilot the station of the future in a couple of instances, a couple of stations, and then we'll see exactly which technologies make sense. So then the third sort of big bucket is taking action on climate change, and we're doing a lot of that. We have again a system that is not prepared for 21st century, 22nd century climate circumstances. We've had over 200 stations be impacted by heavy rainfall events since 2007. In this current capital plan, we're dealing with 68 of them, and we've got another 32 teed up to do in the next capital plan. Some of the interventions are pretty straightforward, like raising the top stair so that water can't flow down the stairs, vent covers, whether they're operable or they're raised vent covers, and some of them are more complicated, dealing with drainage and having to work with our colleagues at the city on managing stormwater more effectively. But we're doing that, and we're protecting, I haven't talked a lot about the railroads, but we're protecting the Hudson Line, which is Metro North line that is highly vulnerable. It sits on the Hudson River, which is tidal estuary, so exposed to coastal surge, but also it sits at the bottom of, for the most part, a giant escarpment, and we've had big mudslides that have impacted service. So we have the funds to make the first 20 miles, the lower Hudson Line, more resilient, and we're going to be creating the concept design to do the entire Hudson Line, which also fits into the governor's priority that we improve service throughout the Hudson Valley. So that's our capital plan. Lots of ways I can talk about that we're doing it better, faster, and cheaper, but maybe I'll save that for the panel since I'm getting the
nod.
hook here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Appreciate that. So if I can ask you to take a seat, and can I ask Julie to join us, Uzo and Kathleen.
Oh, I didn't know you were on.
That's quite interesting, actually, what you just said, Jamie, while everyone's sitting down, is I've just written a paper, actually, on sponge cities, and New York was deemed as an exemplar project around dealing with surface water flooding. So it'd be nice to tie up on that as well. But anyway, over to you. Off you go.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome. Welcome to Twin Talk panel number 3. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Reimagining the Next Generation of Transportation Infrastructure in the U.S. This panel comes with a 100% guarantee for excitement and riveting thought. And there are two reasons why I can make this guarantee. The first, absolutely the panelists on the stage. We've got Jamie, president of MTA C&D. You've already heard a bit about what he's overseeing. We have Uzo Amaka from Terminal 1, and we'll get to hear about the program over there. And Caitlin Johnson, vice president of Northeast Operations for Jacobs, one of the best engineering firms in the world. And the second reason I can make this guarantee is because of how this agenda has been built up over the day. For those of you who have started with us in the morning, you'll have noticed that Rory very intuitively planted the seed with some inspiration. We had the lieutenant governor, we had the mayor of San Antonio, who really gave us a sense of the possibility and the benefits of infrastructure. From there, Rory then programmed in, okay, what are the challenges? Where are we in infrastructure in the US? And we heard those dismal grades reported out, C's, D's, maybe a few B's in there, but a lot of room for improvement. The next panel after that, we talked about investment and partnerships and how that can really elevate and create some innovation and speed to addressing some of our infrastructure challenges. And now we get to this panel. And this is where the rubber hits the road. Each of these individuals are here to deliver massive capital programs that encompass the ambitions and the vision that we have for infrastructure, both in its function and its aspirations. So I'm incredibly excited to hear what these folks have to say. So as I flip to my questions, you guys please start thinking about questions of your own. So first, I'd love to set the stage. Our topic is about the next generation of infrastructure. And each of you are involved with capital programs or designing projects that are going to last for the next half century. So can you give this audience a sense of the vision of what success looks like with that capital program? I'm going to start with Jamie. Specifically, you outlined an ambitious program that will address needed deferred maintenance. How have you also incorporated some of the aspirational elements into this capital plan beyond deferred maintenance?
It's a great question. I kind of think I answered it. So I don't want to repeat it, but so that I just want to, the principle that we take is that we're trying to take advantage of economies of scale and economies of geography in the way that we get work done, and I think that, let's say, economies of scope as well. And that's the point is, when we have a 24/7 system. We can't, occasionally we need to shut it down for some sort of major disruptive work, but we have to be very careful about maximizing the benefits of it. So what we're trying to do much more is, when we had a capital group that was part of the operating agency, they might have gone and, done an ADA station, accessibility within a station, 1 year, and then issued a separate contract to deal with the communications components in that station, and so they'd have to shut it down for a bunch of weekends, and then you come back a year later, it's shut down for a bunch of weekends again. And when we've blown all that up and are just lining things up in integrated bundles, and we're actually moving forward with that so that we can be much more efficient and get new technology into the system at the same time. And really, I mean, I don't know if you know this, the devices themselves are relatively straightforward. There's systems integration that's required. For us, it's really about bringing power and fiber into the system. Some of that we're doing through public-private partnership. We've got a partnership with Bolden, which enabled cell service in all of our 472 stations. They are now pulling the fiber and installing the antennas in all 700 miles of tunnels over the next decade. And some of that we're doing ourselves. But We really are on the lookout for how we bring cutting edge communications technology into the system, and I mentioned some of the ways that we're doing that.
That's great. So, though the term deferred maintenance is used, it's really leapfrogging what the system is capable of doing.
Yeah, great. Resignaling is a great example of that, right? I mean, everybody knows this. You look broadly at the historical perspective. We had huge underinvestment in mass transit in New York for decades, mostly because of Robert Moses, right, and the priority of vehicular transportation. So because of that, we didn't install some of the, we have 100-year-old signaling technology. We didn't make any progress. Now we are leapfrogging, and we're installing the most cutting-edge CBTC technology, essentially 5G, geospatial technology throughout the system, and we're ripping out 100-year-old signal systems and replacing it with brand new signal systems.
That's great. Very exciting. So over to Terminal 1. It is a $9.5 billion project. Can you share some of the innovations that a capital deployment of that scale has the chance to create?
Sure. Just to sort of set the stage a little bit, New Terminal 1, we're in the middle of it, right? We signed our partnership with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey in June of 2022. So we are 3 years in construction and basically a year away from planes taking off. So what we have done is a private-public partnership with the Port Authority to both design, construct, and deliver this transformational international terminal that we will operate for another 30 years. So as we're designing, we're thinking about 30 years of operation and really doing it around a core concept, and that is an exceptional guest experience, right? And so how do you take your passenger from the frontage of our terminal all the way to boarding their flights and using innovation technology to sort of back that up? Things that they see, but things that they also don't see in terms of information technology, operational technology, and doing so in a building that is beautiful. We think it's absolutely beautiful, credit to all of the architects, but also a building that is resilient, raised out of the floodplain, a building that is sustainable. We are thinking about things like even energy resiliency. We will be the first terminal that's actually producing its own energy on site. 13,000 panels, solar panels, are on the roof of this terminal. We think about water conservation because all of those things are things that a passenger, a guest as we call our passengers, sees but also gets to experience. We're building a building of the future using innovation to make sure that we're also not impacting our environment. It is a very large structure. We're taking 3 buildings, the Green Garage, the existing Terminal 2, what was the existing Terminal 2, the existing previous Terminal 3, and creating a new international terminal into one large building. The first phase will again take flight in 2026 with 14 gates, but ultimately at the end of its construction will be 23 gates and servicing 60 million passengers a year. So really, throughout that experience, smart technology, obviously we're looking at things like biometrics, but also working with partners like TSA and CBP. This is a border crossing, a very active border crossing, and again, we're international only, and working with our partners to ensure that we have that enhanced technology to make that experience smooth, but also safe and remain secure.
That's great. That's fantastic. So beyond the actual physical movement of people, expanding the edict to incorporate that full customer experience, whether it is how the energy is produced, the security that they feel, the ease of moving through the airport.
Right, and then looking at the fact that your guest is, it can be a budget traveler, a family, it can be a business traveler, right, an international traveler entering the United States. And so you have to look at all of these profiles and say how are their experiences that they can each have that exceptional experience, and really using that smart infrastructure to make that experience seamless for each and every type of guest that comes into our terminal.
That's great. Thank you. All right, Caitlin, I'd love to get the perspective from Jacobs. So Jacobs has extensive involvement in major transportation infrastructure in aviation, transit, roadway networks. How have projects kept pace with rapid urbanization and demographic shifts?
Thank you. I think we see a key theme across complex projects at the moment, transportation and infrastructure. I think the projects that are most successful are the ones that view assets as kind of living cycles as opposed to being static. And what I mean by that is projects that are really focused on serving the development of the communities as they grow and shape and transition and change. You mentioned in your question, demographics are changing, rapid urbanization, and I think that's really important as we move forward. To pick up an example here locally, and Jamie, one that will be familiar to you, Penn Station Access is a project that Jacobs have been supporting for a number of years. This is really developing, building the Metro North line up to the Bronx and connecting into Penn Station to reduce the congestion that we see there in the city at the moment. I think some of the examples of success that have been seen really center around moving fast but breaking nothing, which sounds like an odd quote to come up with. But I think as engineers, we need to maintain that technical rigor and focus moving forward, but balance it with the urgency of the needs that we're seeing from the community and from the users. So again, taking Penn Access as an example, here, users are really looking to us to make sure that their commute remains safe, on time, and a positive experience.
That's great. So really advancing the experience of the user, but not disturbing what's happening today.
Exactly. And I think kind of building on that point, that stakeholder engagement in these key iconic projects is so important. These projects are complex. There's a number of interfaces, and really bringing on those stakeholders in the journey with you as they progress.
Thank you, Caitlin. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to advance the conversation and just push a little bit further out and ask about technological innovations, and really create an opportunity to reimagine mobility. I'm going to reverse the order just to spice it up a little bit. So Caitlin, I'm going to start with you. These are different themes in technological advancements, and what I'd like to ask you about is roadway networks, EVs, AVs. Have they already made their mark on our transportation networks? And what about autonomous vehicles? And what do you think are realistic timelines, or how should our infrastructure adapt?
Thank you. I think for this question, we actually have to look back to look forward. The early 1800s was when the first electric vehicle came out. And I think from memory, they were actually created for women. So we didn't have to turn the handle on a kind of smelly old diesel engine. Moving forward to the 1900s, I think a third of vehicles in the States were actually electric. And then there was a drop-off. And I think what happened really is roadway infrastructure progressed, but the technology and the infrastructure to support electric vehicles didn't. Charging stations weren't there. Owners still charge their vehicles at home. So I say this to say, circle forward to today. We're working on the NEVI program, partnering with state DOTs across the US, and really looking at how do we provide infrastructure around charging facilities to really support EVs take off in earnest, demonstrating and supporting with equity, supporting rural communities to make sure that everyone has access to charging facilities that they can really depend on. Taking a different tact, I think, in your question, looking at autonomous vehicles, I think we've seen a lot of really successful pilot studies, and one of those will be keen to you last year at JFK for the car parking facilities. But really, I think moving forward, we're seeing more autonomous vehicles come into play in freight yards, airports, but really kind of planned corridor routes. I think we've still got a bit of a way to go to really get that confidence from the community on safety and dependability, especially when you start even thinking about highly urbanized areas.
So really having that innovation happen in specific spaces that are contained for testing and piloting before further adoption.
Absolutely. I think there's a real confidence builder there in terms of adoption as we look further.
Great. Okay. Jamie, AI.
Oh, we're going reverse order.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm circling.
Yeah, really,
I'm circling.
yeah.
I didn't know where you were going to
Yeah.
sit.
All right.
you
Okay.
know.
All right. Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
AI, Internet of Things, big data. How is that influencing planning, construction, design, and the management of future transportation?
In the public sector, happening more slowly, right? We all have to acknowledge that. I guess the real complexity and innovation for us is, it's sort of like, any genius can invent, an iPhone or something, right? But actually getting brand new technology to get incorporated into a 100-year-old system, I think is the thing that takes real genius and innovation. And for us, that's what we've identified, is that's about project management. I think everybody in here, we're all out selling. I'm selling our capital program. You're selling your products. But we all know that to actually get things done, you have to be a more effective project manager, and that's the culture that we're trying to create at our agency. One way to do that is just accountability and monitoring and that sort of thing. But another is we're putting a lot of digital systems in place that we haven't had in the past. And I think everyone knows the construction sector, in some cases by its very nature, is historically unproductive. I think there's a McKinsey study I always like to reference that the global economy loses $1.7 trillion a year based on the lack of growth in construction productivity versus all other sectors of the global economy over the last 20, right? If the construction sector had grown, productivity had grown like the rest of the economy, we would have $1.7 trillion more of productivity. And we're trying to do something about that. We BIM, digital twins, right? We use Bentley software for some of that, so there you go. But we also are all in on a PMIS system, a program management information system. We sort of, we have like 50 different systems that we use to run construction projects. We're pulling the Band-Aid off and moving straight into Oracle Unifier and getting all our projects onto it, and then plugging in the different modules so that we can manage projects more effectively. And in the meantime, we're not waiting. We're just using straight up dashboards to monitor, on time, on budget. That's what it's all about for us. And we've done a lot on that. And there's a lot of use of digital tools, and I don't think we've, sort of gotten there on AI yet. We're expecting some of our consultants to come forward with some of that innovation. But that's our approach. That's where I think innovation is most important.
So I'm hearing a bit of a mix that it's the innovation, but really it's actually the people, the managers who can figure out how to bridge those new technologies with an old system and move things forward. And again, to reference Caitlin's point, without breaking anything in between.
Yeah, well, sometimes you do need to. We'll talk about pen access after. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, Uzo. The new Terminal 1 building has ambitious goals to be among the world's best airport for customer experience. You referenced that. You have ambitions to reflect the region and sustainability targets. What of the flip side of innovation and technology and the risks, and in particular around cybersecurity? What are you considering in terms of cybersecurity and privacy with the Terminal 1 building?
Yeah, when we talk about operational technology, information technology, obviously we're very cognizant that a cyber attack, as we've seen very recently, can bring an airport, a terminal to a standstill, right? So we have really thought about this with a couple of pillars here. One is that in terms of regulation, the FAA, TSA, there are very stringent regulations, particularly in the last couple of years. And so in our design, right, obviously the first stop is making sure that we're complying with all of those regulations, which are quite stringent. And we have a team, a really great team, right? We have an information officer, a chief information security officer, and that's not just at the operational stage, but really looking at it from the planning and the design phase, because what we've done with the entire design of the building is think of it with a security-minded sort of philosophy, right, in that design, in building the infrastructure. So making sure that you have that strong team. I love them dearly, and I authenticate about 5 times a day. Right, and so one of the things that when I was talking to the team about sort of this question, it isn't just about the team that's designing that infrastructure and really thinking about it, but also making sure that it's in the culture. So yes, I have to authenticate many times a day, but we're also doing desktop exercises. And I've mentioned to you, we have not had a flight takeoff, right? Our building is still in construction, but our team is coming together and we're talking about these things. What if this happens? And I think one of the major areas of sort of security also is making sure that we segregate operational technology and information technology, right? So that if we have a breach in one area, the team is very particular about the fact that you can shut off that breach and it doesn't spread to every area. And so looking at the resiliency and the security within our information system, that's been a big goal of the team. Right, we have a tag again, that customer experience. We want customers to go through and not really feel all of those things, but we're doing them in the background. So our IT team says it's IT like no other.
That's great. I can just imagine. I mean, there's such an opportunity to leverage data to improve the customer experience, but at the same time, not wanting that to affect the operation. So having to have what I've heard from some OT folks, a demilitarized zone that separates information technology from OT.
And then also the acknowledgement that you can have all of those things and still have a breach, right? If we were designing this and thinking that we're infallible, that would be, probably the biggest mistake we would make. So our team is looking at the design, looking at the segregation, looking at the security, but also saying when something happens, how do we recover? And so looking at where our data is backed up, off-site, how quickly can we recreate that data? All of those things, the planning for an incident is a big part of this as well. And just being realistic that we will always have to be vigilant.
That's great. That's great. Yes, with technology and innovation, there comes risk. Great to see that both are being addressed. The third topic is around policy, funding, and equity and leadership examples. And with every plan drawn and dollar spent on infrastructure, there's an opportunity for leadership. So I'd love you all to provide some examples of how your organization is evaluating its societal impact. Uzo, I've heard a lot about the new Terminal 1 at JFK. How has the capital program you're overseeing supported innovation without creating inequities or leaving communities behind?
Sure. I think, we talk a lot about this investment and the delivery on time and on budget, right? But one of the things I strongly believe that the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey has done an amazing job of saying that all of these projects have to be delivered and looking at local communities and diverse partnerships. And at New Terminal 1, we not only believe in those goals that we've set out, but we really believe in terms of the fabric of what we're doing, that we're building a terminal that's not just in Southeast Queens. We're a part of Southeast Queens. Southeast Queens is one of the most diverse neighborhoods, communities in the country. And we believe that our terminal should reflect the community in which we are a part of and not just building a structure in. So when we talk about those goals of sort of diverse partnerships, what that means for us is today we have awarded over $1.5 billion in minority and women-owned businesses as a partnership in New Terminal 1. And when we look at local, we define that very specifically. Local for us is hyper-local. Tier 1 is the 37 zip codes that surround the airport, and that's been established by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Tier 2 is the borough of Queens, and that's all. That's what counts as local. So I live in Brooklyn. I don't exactly count as local. And we have to date awarded over $500 million to local firms. And then also, when you look at our sponsors, we're a combination of infrastructure, labor, And Ulico is one of our financial sponsors, and Ulico represents the unions. And when we talk about job creation at New Terminal 1, it is not just the construction that we're looking at, but this is where we are today in the design and construction. So today, 2,100 workers are going onto site. That's how many workers we have. We will go up to, well past 2,500 workers every day. And of that, 19% of them are hyperlocal. And so we understand that at a $9.5 billion investment, it is an economic driver. And we have an obligation, right? So when we're looking at all of the sustainability aspects, again, is how do we impact the environment and the community that is right around us. But we also want to make sure that we are creating jobs and opportunities. And we want to make sure that our team is gaining the benefit of all of that diverse and really wonderful skill sets and knowledge, and that we should reflect the community. I'm really proud of our leadership team. You know, we have a female CEO and a really diverse leadership team, and really believe in this wholeheartedly. And so it's not only about the construction aspect, and as we're about to get into operation, we're saying that that's where those long-term jobs are. Right? So our partners in operation. So we're taking what we're doing on the construction end and the design end, and we'll also bring it to concessions, and we will bring it to operations as well.
Yeah, incredibly inspiring. A new vision for the terminal, but a new vision for people who live around it.
Absolutely.
That's
Excellent.
great.
Julie, should we take some questions from the floor?
Oh, absolutely. Caitlin
Any
and Jamie, you were
questions?
safe.
Where's the roving mic? Daniel? Can I show hands, please? Please, one over there, please, Dan. Step forward, step forward. There we go. Thank you.
Actually, a question for Jamie. So, Jamie, John Williams from Bechtel. Congratulations on the $68 billion capital plan and gaining the confidence of the governor and the assembly. I just wondered if you could say a little bit about the challenge of spending the money. That's not easy, spending it quickly and effectively in that period of time. So just what are some of the things that you're thinking about to make sure that you're spending it efficiently and at pace over the next few years?
That's great. Well, we're unfortunately, we're not going to hand it over to a program delivery partner, John. But you know, that's a very interesting sort of question and problem, because I have a wonderful colleague, Deputy Chief of Staff, who joined us from the private sector, and we have almost every week we have a commitment meeting of all of our senior executives, meaning we have a target. This year we need to award $12 billion in contracts, and then with the $68 billion, we got to ramp up to $15 billion a year over the next few years. And she's sort of the first meeting where we were talking about how we're going to get all this. She said, "I'm confused. Isn't the goal to spend less money? I mean, how come why are we sitting here trying to figure out how we can spend more money?" And it is, when you're responsible for that level of investment, you do really have to create an assembly line and put the systems in place to get it done. And we all know, I mean, I take a lot of issue with some of the quasi-academic critics of, how much it costs to build things in our system. But one thing that they're right about is a lot of public agencies, the stops and the starts to funding, right? The fact that you're going and getting, $16 billion to build the tunnels under the Hudson River, and you're creating a whole new entity for it and hiring Tim Gianfrancesco to run it for you, that is not an efficient way to spend infrastructure money, because they had to build up a whole organization from scratch, and it takes forever. We have the alternative to that, which is, so long as we have consistent levels of capital investment, we can build a dedicated organization, create the expertise, create the assembly line, where we're scoping the projects, making sure we're identifying the right project, doing the design work, making a decision about whether we're doing design build or design bid build or P3 or what have you. Being strategic about that, bundling it together efficiently, as I was talking about, and then getting it out the door and awarding the contract, and then managing the hell out of it. That assembly line of ours is the way that we're going to manage to make this level of investment in our system. There are alternative pieces of it as well. I didn't talk about the Interborough Express, but this is the new light rail line that we're going to build between Brooklyn and Queens. It's got enormous equity benefits. Would have been my answer to your question, Julie. That we're going to look at that as a P3 delivery model. We haven't made any decisions about it, and there are different options for it. But that it may be because it's separated from the rest of our system. There may be some advantages to that. So that sort of puts it off to the side, and it's a different format. Or our rolling stock, we created a new rolling stock program that is separate from my agency to focus on. We have to invest in about $10 billion of rolling stock over the next 5 years. So that sort of gets pulled off, and then we can focus on our third-party contracts. But you do really need. It's just every day. It's like when are we awarding? When is this getting advertised? When are we awarding it? What's missing? We have all kinds of tracking sheets, and we're very focused on that.
Any other questions?
Thank you all for your time. I'm Lindsay O'Leary here with the American Society of Civil Engineers. We've talked a lot about different acronyms today, including AVs and EVs. I'd like to bring up another acronym as we're thinking about next generation and really understand if you're in earnest having conversations about flexibility. So in transportation, multimodal transportation is critical, and so it's great to have representation from many sectors here. But what about the wave of the future and eVTOLs? Electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. Are any of your teams discussing how to be prepared for when that technology comes to market and how your systems might integrate so those entire multimodal networks can be connected? Thank you.
I heard Rick Cotton talking about this the other day, so this might be you.
And I was going to say, and I'm not with the Port Authority, right? But I can tell you, for us, right, we are building a traditional terminal with classified planes and things like that. So not necessarily thinking about it at New Terminal 1 for what we're building, but I have definitely heard the Port Authority as they look at their network in terms of even at JFK and potential opportunities for where that would be situated at JFK. So can't speak to it as to New Terminal 1, but definitely the Port Authority is thinking and looking at these aspects.
Sir, you had a question?
Sure. Eddie Felitas, 929 Group. We finance infrastructure debt. I'd stand, but I'm injured. Uzma Amaka, congratulations, firstly, bringing together a P3 model, the Carlyles, the JLCs of the world, into the structure has been wonderful. I guess the next step is, how do you guys commercialize this? Does it look and feel like a Aéroport de Paris, where you guys are doing this for different jurisdictions, or thinking about how to have a playbook for other folks who want to do something similar? Or does it, stop with a case study or whatever might be in between?
Well, this consortium is very specific for this project, right? This consortium and what you're referencing is our consortium of our financial sponsors, which is Ferrovial, Carlyle, JLC, and Ullico, came together specifically for this project. So we are the New Terminal 1, obviously a special entity created to design, construct, and develop. Now, whether those partners will come again together to do other work, I can't say. But having that advantage of when you look at that sort of consortium and those skill sets has been pretty tremendous, right? Because you're looking at infrastructure experience, labor experience with Ullico, JLC particularly in driving our community engagement. So it really is a unique formula. I do think we all say, particularly as we're in this last year and very stressful stage of delivery, that there will probably be lots of papers written and lots of white papers written on this project and different aspects of it. And one of them will be, how do you bring together a consortium that can successfully tie the multiple things that you have to bring, and particularly bring the financing for something like $9.5 billion just in this first phase, right? That in itself is a feat. And I want to mention that consortium came together out of COVID. Right? When I joined this project in 2020, the idea was that this project was going to be signed and we were going to start, and within 6 weeks of starting my new job as an attorney on the project, we went out because of COVID. And imagine building something and finding the financing for something around a time when there was no international travel to sort of finance an international only terminal. So it is a formula that I think a lot of people will look at and look at that sort of partnership and the kinds of expertise that you need to bring together.
Cool. Any more questions? Because I've definitely got one. But sir, you go first. Daniel, could you?
Thank you so much. Hey, Jamie. Billy Terry from Atkins Realis. How you doing today? Thank you, panel. Just a quick question. Jamie, as it relates to the 2025-29 capital plan, first of all, congratulations on it. Will each of the operating agencies have their own draft timeline and packaging plan as it relates to that particular operating agency? I know everything's coming out of C&D, but will each operating agency have their own draft timeline and packaging plan as how that their particular element of the capital plan take place?
Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, the plan is, it's sort of, it's actually by both custom, and there's some statutory parameters around the distribution between New York City Transit and the railroads, and then Bridges and Tunnels actually generates its own revenue from tolls, and so we know we have a program for each of them, and in the book there's blue pages in the back. They've got each category, sort of the cash flows through, and we're in the midst of packaging it all together. Since I'm speaking, I should take the opportunity. I don't know if, Mike, if you've been here the whole time or if you just walked in, but should say that we have our colleague, Region 2 Administrator of the FTA, Mike Collada, who at the staff and regional level we have a great relationship with, and big piece of the program is anticipated to be federal dollars. We're estimating $14 billion. There's a huge amount of uncertainty around that, so I can say we have a great working relationship with the feds, but also that's a big issue and big concern is that we know across every sector this is a major concern, but we have both the risk to the congestion relief funded dollars, which is $15 billion in this current program, and then the question of whether we'll get a full reauthorization of transportation funding in 2026. That's probably the biggest risk issue about whether we're able to deliver the program.
Cool. Sir, you can have the last question.
Yeah, so I think I might have heard a similar answer to this already, but I'll ask it more directly. Dennis Leavenworth with Jacobs, thank you all for being on the panel and speaking, appreciate it. Some of these programs, capital program, the MTA, the Loan program, they occur over a long period of time. So in the case of MTA, 5 years, and the Bridge loans 4 years, and then you phase 2. So how do you plan for the future with technology of transportation and digital systems and AI and everything moving at such a fast pace? When you put together this consortium at T1, or when you put together the capital, how do you make sure, kind of similar to when you're procuring this amount of work, that you're being agile enough to keep up with the latest needs so you're getting the best benefit for your investment?
I think I can start because we're in that really critical point, right? Right now we have our design and construction team saying no change, right? On time. You have to have a point that you can't really make those changes to be on time for delivery. But future proofing is the issue, is the big thing. Particularly when you look at our IT team, they have really thought to make a system that incorporates flexibility and the ability to say, you're not going to have to rip it all up to think for the future. New technology is coming all the time. We're working with our partners at TSA and CBP because there's technologies that are being tested around the country, and some of which we'll be able to implement for opening and some of which we won't. But we will be looking to implement those things. So we're constantly thinking about that. And really at this stage in the design where we're at this critical point of not being able to make any more changes, that structure that we've put in place is really to have flexibility. There are things like, LiDAR technology that we may not get in exactly how we want it, but we will be looking at it immediately thereafter. And again, we are operating where the wonderful thing about infrastructure, as we're talking about, is they're not things that you rip up in 10 years and 20 years, right? We're operating this terminal for 30 years, and during that period of 30 plus years, we will be making major upgrades to the system. But the idea is, can you design an infrastructure that allows for that flexibility and continues to operate, right? Once passengers go through this terminal, we will not be shutting down this terminal. But what we will have to do is sort of make those adjustments as we go along.
Yeah,
Sorry, go, please.
I guess two big things. One is we've moved as much as we can into design build, where we're not doing 100% design and we're not creating enormously prescriptive specs. We're focused on performance-based specs, and then we rely on the market, which is a lot of you, to come back and tell us how you're going to deliver it, and that allows us to be at the cutting edge of technology. What was the second thing I was going to say? I forget.
Okay, well, I've got one question, observation that I'd like to ask. Okay, and some of you may have heard me talking about last night at the event last night. You talk, all of you, very eloquently about collaboration coming together. We see when we're doing a major project, such as all of yours, we take 3 steps forward with innovation, new technology. And then when that project finished, we all take 2 steps back, because everybody goes left or right. How are you going to combat that? How are you going to keep that 2 steps back down to a bare minimum and keep that collaboration going? What we've done previously is investment funds. So basically the client put in a certain amount of money, the investor put in a certain amount of money, and the consultants put in a certain amount of money. And therefore they had skin in the game, but it meant they shared the wins on the intellect going forward. So when they came out of that project, that intellect kept going forward. Yes, no answer, or a very quick, brief answer. How would you keep innovation going forward, moving from one project to the next?
I don't know if I followed all of that, but for us, it's just that's why we created an agency that's dedicated, staffed, and we're going to move from one project to the next.
Yep.
And bring all the innovation forward.
Keep it moving forward.
Yeah.
Julie?
I would say documentation and investment in people. Those are the ways.
There's a 30-year return on investment that has to happen, right?
Yep.
So our investors are motivated to ensure that we're always moving forward and being innovative.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think for me, that's one of the things we're very passionate about, being a global company. I think that's a responsibility companies like ours and others in the room have, to share best practice and lessons learned between sectors, between clients. But for me, I think documentation, definitely, but just the culture. We all have to be committed to do things better and to improve. And I think keeping that culture across our sector is really important.
Cool, thank you. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, can we thank the panel, please? So as the panel steps down, I'd like to ask our next keynote speaker, Renee, to step up and step forward, please. Excellent.
Hi, thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Happy afternoon. Happy post-lunch. How are we all doing? We got some energy going? We got some energy going? Great, great. It is so great to be here. My name is Renee Willette. I am with the U.S. Water Alliance. I want to say a huge thank you to all of the sponsors who made this happen, to Bentley Systems, the UFI, so many organizations and groups. So thank you so much. Let's see, maybe I need to hit this to move it forward. There we are. There I am. So if you're not familiar with the U.S. Water Alliance, we are a national nonprofit organization that brings together water utilities of all sizes. We bring together private companies, global engineering firms, some of which of the top engineering firms in the world, many of which have the privilege of joining on the panel in just a little bit. We also bring together community organizations, academics, environmental justice advocates. We really believe that when you put people together, diverse voices together, you come up with better solutions around water challenges. We advance a One Water vision. How many people in the room have heard of One Water before? Yeah, this is such, okay, you guys, I mean, this is cream of the crop here. So we've really tried to eliminate the silos between drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater. And if you look at the report card that we all got, I think it was a D+, C-, and a D. I think if you think of a One Water scorecard, we're probably at a C- right now. So we have a lot of room to improve. I'd want to share just one story about how I got into water. And then I would love to do a couple thought experiments with you before I round out my few minutes with you. I got into water in San Francisco. I was working for the mayor's office in San Francisco. My background is in public policy. And I was thinking about economic development and how do you create systems of economic empowerment for communities across San Francisco, when two people walked into my office and they wanted to talk about water infrastructure. And they had a vision around how do you connect water infrastructure to people's lives. And in hearing them talk about it, it really transformed the way I thought about economic development, the way I thought about how do you improve people's lives through public infrastructure. And from then, I went to work with the water department, and I supported the largest capital project for the sewer system in San Francisco's recent history. So it was a $2.7 billion sewer system improvement program, where my role was really to think about how do you line up workforce development opportunities? How do you line up small business contracting opportunities? How do you line up philanthropic investments with that to make sure that you're leveraging multiple sources of resources to impact people's lives? And so that's really why I came into water. That's why I'm at the U.S. Water Alliance, and I'm just thrilled to be here. And one of the best parts about my job is that I get to talk to people from across the country about water issues. Last week, I was talking to a group of fifth graders. Today, I'm talking to global infrastructure experts such as yourselves. Because it's after lunch, I wanted to do a thought experiment with you. So I'm going to ask you the questions that I asked the fifth graders. Are you ready? Okay. How many of you, by a show of hands, how many of you know where your water comes from at your house? It's okay. Don't be embarrassed. You don't know. It's okay. A lot of fifth graders didn't know it either. Okay, that's good. Okay. Now, how many of you took the subway today? How many of you flew on an airplane today? How many of you used water today? Okay, interesting. Not that I have a chip on my shoulder, but I just noticed that water is being used by every single person every single day. And as I like to think about it, it's the foundational infrastructure. Now, one more question. Imagine yourself in fifth grade. Think of the school that you were at in fifth grade. How many of you at that school went through a time where you didn't have water or wastewater for several days on end? One person, two people, three people. Okay, I have a whole room. We have three people. Okay. Now I want to say that if I had asked that question today in Jackson, Mississippi, in Houston, in different cities, in North Carolina, the entire classroom of fifth graders would have stood up. Because we are having such severe challenges with our water systems across the country. And at the U.S. Water Alliance, we think that they're solvable when we work together and we create a new paradigm for water management. Now, for a couple minutes, I just want to share with you, some of the high-level challenges that we're seeing in the water sector. I want to talk about a little bit of the work the U.S. Water Alliance does, and then I'll close with a couple trends that I'm seeing, and then we'll have our panel discussion about water. Very high level, and we've heard a lot about this today. One of the biggest challenges for water systems across the country is aging and failing infrastructure. We have some pipes in the country that are over 100 years old. When I was working in San Francisco, we were upgrading technology from the 1940s. There has been a steady decline in federal investment in water. Since the 1970s, of course, IIJA was a blip in the positive direction. But when you look at the level of investment in water relative to other infrastructure sectors, water has been on a decline. Everyone else has been steady. So water systems are inherently dependent on local ratepayers. As affordability challenges have been exacerbated, we're seeing systems be underinvested in across the country. And a lot of our GMs of the U.S. Water Alliance like to say that most cities are one disaster away from being another Jackson, Mississippi. Which is debilitating to our economy, it's debilitating to our families and our communities. Severe weather, increasing storms, drought, Wildfire threats, that is just increasing right now for all of our water systems. We have workforce development challenges. Our organization did a study. In the utility sector alone, we are anticipating a gap of 300,000 utility careers. That doesn't even take into consideration all of our engineering partners, all of our contracting partners. So who's going to manage these systems as we're investing in them? And then I think most fundamental to the water sector, our challenges are fragmentation. If you look nationally, there's about 3,000 electric utilities. If you think about water utilities, there's 55,000 drinking water utilities across the country, 16,000 wastewater utilities across the country, and the vast majority of those serve very small populations. So we have a challenge around how do we scale innovation, how do we scale technologies, and how do we scale best practices across the country. But at the U.S. Water Alliance, we are very hopeful about water. We're hopeful because we know that water is a unifying issue in the public sphere, in the civic sphere. We do an annual poll every year. This last year, when we remind voters of water, 92% of voters ranked ensuring a reliable water supply as the top concern for the country. Now, what's important about that is that you have to remind voters of water. If you don't talk about water and you just talk about what are the issues everyone cares about, other things will come up: inflation, the economy, Ukraine, like so many things will come up. But if you remind people about water, if that's one of the lists, then it will elevate up. But because water is an invisible infrastructure, it's underground, it's out of sight, out of mind often, you have to have that constant pressure, that constant narrative and storytelling about water. And so that's why at the U.S. Water Alliance, we really work on three things that I'll share with you. We work on how do we frame water issues and inspire the country to action around water issues. So we partner with our private sector partners, we partner with our utilities, our community-based organizations to do high-impact research, to get out the word and get out the data around what are the needs for water infrastructure. We also pilot and test innovative practices in place. So we work with communities or practices across the country around whether it's alternative project delivery or whether it's affordability practices or workforce development programs for water. We seek to pilot and test, and then the third thing we do is we spread and scale what works. So if you're not familiar with us, we have a annual One Water Summit, which is the gathering of all of the innovative leaders in the water sector and many of our partners to talk about pressing issues that we're all facing today. We also issued the U.S. Water Prize, which I encourage all of you, if you're not familiar with it, to consider applying for next year. And we really seek to kind of just expand the network and do peer learning and exchange. And that's what we're seeing across the country that's needed. Forums like this, forums where people are getting together and socializing and talking about innovation. And so I'll just close with a couple trends, and then we'll go to the panel. Obviously, we've talked a lot today about new federalism. I think what we're seeing is, maybe we have to start thinking about water without the words, the federal government should, right? Thinking about how do we think about states? How do we think about regional approaches, regional funding solutions, state solutions? Permitting reform is obviously huge. We'd love to see that go through. We think that there's a huge opportunity to incentivize regional partnerships for water systems. And I think if we look forward 10 years, if we don't have more regional systems, I think we're failing as a sector. So I think we have a lot of work to do there. And then, I think I'll just close with the opportunity for partnerships is huge in water. And I think that it's not only private sector partnerships, it's what's the role of philanthropy, what's the role of community groups to keep the projects going. So I think I'll close with that, and then we'll go for the panel.
I'd like to ask you a question.
Yes.
Is water too cheap?
Yes.
In the UK, oh, there we go.
Yes, I will say
In the
that.
UK, you can buy a bottle of water for £1 in the shop. On a gym, it's $4.99. On a low-cost airline, it's $7.99. It's supply and demand.
Yeah.
Are we not valuing the true value of water?
It's a great question, and actually well-timed. One thing that we are starting to work on is an updated economic value of water and analysis to show what water actually means to our society and our economy in various sectors. So, but I agree with you. I mean, I think that we have undervalued water. We underpriced water, and that would obviously, adjust the equations of where people are living, how we're investing in water.
Well, you look at the changing climate. The dry seasons, the heat domes, the availability of water is going to shrink, and then all of a sudden we have these deluges that come in that we have to now maintain and actually possibly store that water for later use. But no, thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Please do take a seat.
Okay.
And with that, I'd like to... Oh, toe, sorry, old boy. Yeah, well, there you go. So with that, thank you, Anthony, as always. I'd like to invite now Victoria, Renee, obviously here, David and Paul to the stand, please. Thank you. The stage is yours.
Hello.
Mic check.
Good.
All right. Okay. So we are live. Great job, Renee. Thank you so much for teeing us up. Welcome to the 5th Twin Talk panel, From Sea to Shining Sea, where we'll talk a bit about trends, challenges, and the role that artificial intelligence and technology is playing in the water sector. Renee teed us up very nicely with some of what we're seeing in the water sector, and I love how you put that in terms of water being the foundational infrastructure that we tend not to think about until something happens, a natural disaster, as we saw unfortunately in Southern California in January with the wildfires. And so I'll introduce myself briefly and our panelists, and we'll get into it. I'll ask folks to keep me accountable on time. I'll do my best to honor the 30-minute time slot. I'm Victoria Johnson, a vice president with HDR Engineering, and with friends today, of course, we have Renee Willett, who is the Chief Strategy Officer of the U.S. Water Alliance. We have David Goldwater, who is a Senior Vice President of Public Policy with Stantec. And then last but certainly not least, we have Paul Starella, who's a Senior Vice President and Water Lead for New York Metro right here with AECOM. So certainly glad to have you with us today. And so I'd like to start and follow up with something that you shared, Renee, just with some thoughts, and then we'll get into a few topics that we'll lean into. Tom was kind enough to ground us, of course, in the infrastructure report card. And while we certainly, I believe we're just up a tick there this year for 2025 from a D to a C minus, we certainly have our work cut out for us across infrastructure. As Renee pointed out, in terms of water specifically, we're averaging at about a C minus with drinking water at a C minus. We have wastewater at a D plus and stormwater at a D. So we certainly have some work to do. As we think about some of the challenges that continue to face us, they continue again to be centered around aging and failing infrastructure, deferred maintenance, water crisis, as Renee mentioned, in terms of what we're seeing in Jackson, Flint, water quality issues, pollution, PFAS, forever chemicals, regulatory changes, and workforce, silver tsunami. So the changes are certainly diverse. So how do we continue to lean in together to meet these challenges, and how do we leverage technology and AI to provide the supports that cities needs to do that? Let's start with leaning into essentially the current state of U.S. water infrastructure, to put this in context. Again, national trends, challenges, and legacy issues across the sector. Renee, I'm going to start with you. Your keynote laid out a compelling vision for system-wide One Water and what that approach can look like. To open our discussion, tell us a bit about how this approach is helping communities navigate today's toughest water challenges and what's needed to scale this thinking nationwide.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Victoria. You know, I think foundational to any One Water approach is the concept of partnerships. I think we've heard so much about that today throughout every panel. But I think it's important to underscore that. And I think, you know, thinking about a One Water mindset, you know, you have to think about systems wide. You have to think about who the key partners are, whether it's a private sector partner, whether it's community-based organizations, residents that need to get engaged in it. And are there other government agencies you should be coordinating with? So, you know, you tear up the street once, or you're thinking about, you know, what are the recycled water opportunities? What are the technological advances that you can think about to have multiple benefits around any water investment. I think if we go back to just staying in silos, we are missing opportunities for cost savings. We're missing opportunities to enroll new champions for water, and just for innovative approaches. So I would say that you really have to start with partnerships with any kind of One Water effort.
Sure. Thank you, Renee. Paul, would like to hear from you on this topic. You lead one of the largest urban water portfolios in the U.S. Can you speak to us about some of the most pressing infrastructure issues you're seeing in the New York City metro area, and how are these reflective of national trends?
Yeah, so I'm going to piggyback on what you've heard, aging infrastructure, state of good repair, and also with it is something that Renee mentioned was the stormwater, the stormwater management. Now, ASCE has projected a $1.2 trillion funding gap over the next 20 years for water and wastewater infrastructure, okay, just for state of good repair, okay? Now you get to some of these agencies where they have their capital plans, and the state of good repair work is always competing with mandated projects. In the city here, there was the B&R mandate that took billions of dollars to upgrade some of their wastewater treatment plants. And now you have a CSO mandate, combined sewer overflows, for those that don't know, storage, and these projects are billions. Now, the city spends a lot of money on this, but more is better. More is going to be needed. And we have the operators operating these facilities, and the commissioner said they're using spit and bubble gum, and they are keeping these systems operating. They're meeting permit, so they're really like the unsung heroes in all this. So that's a challenge. But then you couple that with the stormwater issue, and I believe NOAA changed the climate classification to humid subtropical from coastal temperate. So in layman terms, that's just more intense storms and more frequency of that. The system is not designed for that. It's 100 years old. New York City has this massive water infrastructure. Over 1 billion gallons a day comes down from the upstate reservoirs. Over 1 billion gallons goes out through their 14 wastewater treatment plants, which operate in 14 separate drainage basins, which is an issue in itself. There's 7,500 miles of sewer and 7,500 miles of water mains that need to be maintained. Okay, so with the stormwater issue, I think we've had five-year storms in 1 year. It just overwhelms this, and it's not feasible to just go around and dig up the old sewers and we'll just put bigger ones in. That doesn't work, So, what the city's doing and the way to do this is a layered approach that they use with, upgrading, upsizing sewers where they can, using nature-based solutions on top of that to take some of the early storms out, some of the early water overflow, and to retain some of this water, slow it down before it gets into the system and overwhelm it. I had dinner with a renowned Chinese architect recently, Kung Joan Yu. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's the father of Sponge City, and one of his things is if we just took 10% of the Earth's land and made it a sponge city, would solve climate change. So anyway, so those are the big challenges that the city sees, and they're meeting it, but it really takes money, and these projects are extremely long term. It takes a long time, and we're going to have a lot of storms between now and then. So, that's it.
Thank you, Paul. David, I want to bring you in. You've worked extensively with utilities like DC Water on long-term planning and modernization. How would you characterize the current state of America's aging water systems, and what's standing in the way of timely upgrades?
Yeah, so I think, we heard this morning on the infrastructure report card, Paul just talked about the number. Look,
1.2 trillion is just to get a reasonable state of repair. I'd say the biggest challenge we have right now is funding. And you look at the IIJA, you got $55 billion for water, yet 1/3 of the gap in infrastructure across all platforms is water. Renee's keynote, everyone in this room understands nothing in the world happens without water. And we've done some studies, including doing rates and financials here in New York, looking at actually starting the first stormwater utility ever for the city of New York potentially. But we also looked for Atlanta, Louisville, a few others, at what does it take, how long is it for the city's GDP to go to zero if you're without water? It's hours. It's not days, it's hours. Everything shuts down. Yet for some reason, we haven't prioritized water infrastructure in this country as something we need to focus on. Economic development dies. No one can live for very long without water. So A, it's funding. B, we heard earlier from Renee, and we've talked about this, Paul's talked about it. You said it in your comments, right? We don't charge cost of service. We as an industry have done ourselves a disservice, and we have subsidized the cost of water in most utilities across the country. Unless you live in a new community where everything's new, or California where it's required by law, in most cases, you're not paying cost of service, right? So we run both the drinking water program and the process facilities wastewater programs at DC Water. DC Water is looking at roughly $15 billion in capital investment needs on top of the 5-point-something they've already spent to get out of their consent decree, but now looking at aging infrastructure and water issues, right? And so how do you possibly make $15 billion in infrastructure investments affordable to a community of under 1 million people, right? It just doesn't, the math doesn't work. And so we've got to look at different ways to fund and bring in money, right? We do things in Jackson. You and I are heavily engaged in rebuilding the water system in Jackson, our two companies. The government gave $600 million to the city of Jackson. Do we think there's maybe a concern where the federal government should look at several $billion for the city of DC? What happens if water fails in the District of Columbia? I don't know if people realize, but July 3rd last year, we had an algal bloom issue, and we were, I'm going to be honest, not only hours, but honestly minutes away from no water in the District of Columbia. The 4th of July is the #1 day of water usage in the District of Columbia. 180 million gallons a day needed on the 4th of July, minutes away from no water. They have about 12 hours worth of resource storage in DC. It's a little terrifying. Most people don't understand some of that dynamic and how little of a needle that we thread every day in this industry. And as Paul said, the people who day in, day out operate and do the things with duct tape and glue to keep these systems running are the true heroes of this industry. They are unbelievable people. And honestly, we ought to be celebrating them every day because they work tirelessly to keep our infrastructure in place. So,
thank you, David. And want to piggyback on your note around just the gratitude that we owe our operators in the industry. They do such a fantastic job, and as we sometimes get so inundated with the sexy aspect of water infrastructure, we forget about the important on-the-ground work that operators do. I know David Gaddis at DC Water has commissioned a statue right there in their headquarters that really honors the work that our operators do day to day. And so let's shift. I heard some good feedback around challenges and trends around the need for partnerships, Renee, to really remove those silos, climate change, the need for funding, and also really addressing our cost of service and affordability. Let's shift the discussion to talk about resilience in the water sector. The pressure of climate change, just lean in a bit there, and some of the regulatory shifts. We know that we do have, of course, a new federal administration. Some of the drivers, of course, at EPA have certainly changed, but Renee, to your point, those local needs at utilities at that local municipal level are certainly constant, and depending on the state, they may need certainly some alternative funding supports. Let's talk a bit about some of the climate risk, extreme weather, natural disasters, and some of the regulations that are driving some of these new priorities in our sector. Paul, I'm going to shift back to you. AECOM has supported disaster recovery and flood mitigation projects globally, what lessons from climate resilient design are being applied or still missing in U.S. water systems?
Well, one thing, especially a city like this and other older cities, wastewater, water facilities are in very vulnerable areas, vulnerable to storm surge, sea level rise, wind events. If people remember Sandy and Rockaway, what happened there, they said the water was actually coming out of the windows. It wasn't going in, it was coming out. So that's the challenge that is faced. And, you know, things are happening, updated flood maps, vulnerability studies, better modeling of the systems, AI, digital, to kind of give you a warning. Weather forecasting has gotten the higher resolution. But with that, there's some things, that aren't designed so much, and that's backup power, making sure that these facilities do have, a backup power generation system, getting them off the main grid. Wastewater treatment plants generate gas, and they can run generators, and they can be self-sustained to keep the critical processes going. So you are maintaining treatment and not throwing raw sewage out into the street, which is what you don't want, obviously. And one of the other things is, emergency planning, getting that planning done, keeping these facilities accessible, which is another thing. That's another thing that happened during Sandy. There was debris everywhere. You couldn't even get there. And making sure that they can operate automatically, perhaps, or in a IA mode, whatever you want to call it, so they can operate during these storm events, especially outside in the system where people can't get to it and it's remote. And of course, it's governance, it's enforcing regulations, enforcing laws to make sure that these things are happening.
Thank you, Paul. Back to you, David. To build upon that, you've worked closely with cities navigating aging infrastructure, regulatory scrutiny, and climate uncertainty. How are shifting federal and state mandates, especially on quality, affordability, and access, shaping utility planning?
Thanks, Victoria. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a pretty massive shift from last year to this year right now on what some of those programs that are allowed to focus on. We're seeing a fairly significant shift in the current administration with regards to talking about equity, climate, and those types of words as they've been called trigger words that are then being pulled back from funding requirements and other things. I think one of the big concerns that we talked earlier here is funding in general, and there's a current proposal in the President's budget bill. The House took it up last year and likely may look at it this year, which would eliminate the SRF programs, which are there to do exactly those things, to bridge the gap, to provide funding for communities that so desperately need it, to provide for equity for those communities. If we eliminate the SRF program, there are thousands of communities across the country. There are 19,000 cities and towns in this country. About 1,000 of them actually receive federal funding on a regular basis right now. And those other 18,000 will be left at sea, and there will be nothing for them to do. And we've got to look at how we do things differently in this industry. Renee said it in her keynote comments. We have 55,000 regulated drinking water agencies. We have 16,000 wastewater. We have to do something differently. It's not sustainable. We've got to look at regionalization, cooperation. It doesn't mean you have to sell your utility. It doesn't mean you have to have takeover or a private company come in and take over. It means utilizing the power of cooperative purchasing, cooperative operations, doing things more efficiently in order to actually look at how we do things. The other major thing we've got to do, and we've started to see some of this through Bloomberg Philanthropies and others that have stood up the Sustainable Cities program, and are looking at, how do we do things differently from a planning for resilience long term. And one of the mistakes we've made in infrastructure across the board is we look at climate or resilience in a microcosm around a single project and don't understand the impacts it's going to have to the other 30 pieces of infrastructure around it. And by fixing this, you just caused flooding over there, or you just caused a power issue over here, or something else. We have to start looking and planning long-term around resilience, but looking at all aspects of the infrastructure within that area, within the city, within the geography, or we're doing ourselves disservice. We're spending money to burn money somewhere else. And it just, it's something that we're starting to get a better focus on, but it's really just starting to happen now.
That's a critical point. I'm going to come to you next, Renee, but great point, David, around more of that comprehensive approach to utility planning, removing some of those silos. To your point around the topic of equity as well as planning into the future, we see a lot of utilities like DC Water, like WSSC Water, like SFPUC leaning into what we call equitable capital planning. And so in addition to the traditional nuts and bolts of the hard infrastructure, also within that criteria, thinking about those social and environmental impacts as well. So to your point, as they're planning holistically, they can really build in and consider the disinvestment that vulnerable communities experience. So great point there. Renee, as we close out this particular topic around resilience, climate change, and the like, we have so many communities who are facing droughts, of course, in California, the West Coast, flooding, which of course we see all over, as well as storm surges. How is the U.S. Water Alliance helping utilities integrate resilience across stormwater, wastewater, and drinking water systems?
Well, I would say first, fundamentally, we're really trying to, share the news across all of our membership network and the country that, climate stress manifests as water stress. I think we need to name that water systems are the first to be impacted one way or the other, whether it's drought, lack of water supply, whether it's severe storms and flooding, putting human life at risk in communities across the country with severe storms and flooding. So I think that, first of all, just naming that the water sector has a key role to play as a solutions provider to the climate crisis is important. The second thing that I think that we're trying to do is we're really trying to stand up communities of practice across the country. And right now we're working with 12 different cities, including including NYDEP, including Metropolitan, some of the largest urban centers around what is their journey around climate action and how do they want to be solutions providers specifically around mitigation as well as resiliency. So right now we're partnering with them around kind of what's their climate action roadmap. What does it look like over the next few years to have a water utility be centered in climate action? I think, David, to your point, often when we think about resilience efforts, we also think about, one position at a city, right? One person, a sustainability or a resilience officer at a city. My question is, what's the role of a regional water utility in thinking about watershed resilience and thinking about how do we make sure that we have resilient water systems that can connect with emergency needs that we're only going to be seeing increase? I think the water managers across the country, to me, the operators, the general managers, they are thinking not only in theory, but in practice of how do you solve these problems to get people water, wastewater services. And the last thing I'll share about that is when I was at the SFPUC, the head of the wastewater enterprise, we had a wastewater enterprise, water, and then municipal power. The head of the wastewater enterprise would always say to me, Renee, we are one disaster away from being a developing country, right? I mean, he's like, we did not have redundancy on our main interceptor that connected 80% of the city's waste to the Southeast treatment plant where it was processed. We had no redundancy on that interceptor system. One earthquake, and there is no wastewater services for the city of San Francisco. And so, I mean, just think about that. That's how close we are. And it's, for us, maybe we're chicken little skies falling, but man, we live this every day. We think about this. And it's urgent. It's urgent.
Yeah. I mean, if I could add something to that, that's something that the city here is looking at. water resiliency upstate, building tunnels, connecting, and these are billions of dollars. Also, I had mentioned earlier that there's 14 drainage basins here that operate independently, okay? In Singapore, there was a project that we were on where during one of these microstorms, they could take water in the sewers from the area that's being inundated and pump it over to a dry area. So one of the things that the city is looking at is how do we consolidate these things? How do we get them working in that fashion? Of course, it's more difficult here, built environment, big city, utility. I mean, you take it up, God knows what is underground. So, but these are the types of things that the city is doing now. And they're even talking drought, even though we don't think that we've got that issue. But, start to think about that. The day may come where we have water scarcity. What do we do?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to add to that, that thinking is going on, and it's important.
Thank you, Victor. Should we take some questions from the floor?
Absolutely.
Before I do that, I'd like to make one comment, David, about your comment about resilience of this mind mapping. We are seeing a major increase now in citywide digital twins. And the one thing I would like to point out is most people think it's one twin. It is not. Digital twins are multiple twins that have come together. So for your underground asset register, for your resilience register, the visualization is one tool, but the twin that powers it is that multiple pieces of information.
No, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that's so critical about that, and we're working on digital twins with a lot of our utility clients across the country, Metropolitan Water in San Francisco, or in LA, San Francisco PUC, San Diego, DC Water right now, some of those clients that are advancing. One of the things that is a little bit different in the water industry around that is it's just starting to really take off in the innovation side, because at the end of the day, water operators and utility owners are cautious in the water industry for a good reason. Yeah. Because if a mistake happens, you could kill people very quickly, and lots of them. So they're really, really slow to adopt technology in some regards. They're not afraid to, but they got to be careful and deliberate, and they've got to make sure the stuff works. And so the innovation that can come in planning, can come in operation optimization, some of those things like we've worked with Bentley and others in Thames Water in the UK, and we've automated some of those systems. And as we talk about technology and innovation, we did 25% of the system and with digital analytics, and we saved $50 million a year just by 25% of the system looking at how to optimize operations at Thames Water. That's 10 years ago.
Nice number.
We're doing similar things around the country, AECOM, HDR, all doing similar things. We're working together in multiple utilities around the country. Right. So I agree with you, digital twins, the power of what we're doing with technology, but it's really just starting to take off in this industry for good reason.
Yeah, I was going to say, one other thing with that is, and Renee, you mentioned workforce. People think that the utilities are scared, or that they don't want to spook the operators. You're all going to be fired because we're going to do this. They can't get the people, and so this is another way where they can, need less because they just can't get them, but also train quickly because they got to bring people up to speed very fast. So that's another thing that we're saying.
I want to lean in on that before we open it up to the audience. I see my good friend Ross from United from Infrastructure here, and we've all worked together specifically on workforce development throughout infrastructure, but specifically in the water sector. And so in Louisville, Kentucky, again, Los Angeles, San Francisco, you have several utility leaders developing both policies, programs, and methodologies that essentially create job opportunities to help them deal with the silver tsunami, some of the vacancies they can't fill, that both not only support professional services careers, but as Renee shared, also those opportunities for individuals who live in the community who are either unemployed or underemployed for some of those trades and operations and maintenance opportunities. So as we're thinking about, again, utility planning holistically, workforce development, as well as engagement with minority-owned businesses for contracting opportunities is a critical tool to this work as well.
Absolutely fantastic. So, floor, any questions? go first, and then we'll move across, if that's okay.
Hi there. Thanks for the great panel. Ben with Bentley. I've heard for years about the importance of the prospect of circularity in our water systems, and I'm curious if that actually works. Yeah, I mean, the idea that I guess you drink water that is the most clean and then reuse water either through your, toilet systems or rainwater collection or whatever it is. And if it does work and we're not doing it, what are the reasons why that's not happening? If it's governance models or the consumer products we use, et cetera.
Yeah, I can kick that off and then turn it over to colleagues. So we are doing it in certain places, but to answer the last part of your question first, public acceptance and sentiment is probably the biggest barrier. We run the program Pure Water San Diego. That's been 15 years in the making. It took 10 years to get public acceptance, to understand that we are going to use recycled wastewater for drinking water. But the technology is not the issue anymore. The technology is there. You can just put a tap on the back of a wastewater treatment plant with the treatment technology. In California, at the beginning, we had to treat it to ultra pure water, go store it in a reservoir, reintroduce bacteria because nothing could live. It was that pure. And then put it back into a drinking water system. Mm-hmm. They're finally introducing rules that got introduced at the end of last year that are being implemented now. But Pure Water San Diego will now allow for indirect or direct potable reuse. And that's going to be 50% of the drinking water for the city of San Diego by 2050. San Diego was imminent death for water if this didn't happen. California, Southern California has got Pure Water Southern California. You got Pure Water LA. DC is starting to look at water reuse. It is a critical part of the equation. So is it happening? Yes. But public sentiment and acceptance is part of it. And then figuring out, how to manage it from a governance. Sometimes a governance structure is a problem, which is part of why the program fell apart in Tampa, is because of the governance between the city and the water utility, which is an independent authority. So there's some barriers, but it is critical path, and it is something that in some cases can actually solve multiple problems, like in Hampton Roads Sanitation District in Southern Virginia, where you had saltwater intrusion, groundwater subsidence, and depletion of your aquifers for long-term water supply. By doing water reuse and recharging the aquifers, you're killing all three birds with one stone, right? You're taking care of all three problems. Oh, and another added benefit that they're actually then reducing the cost they have to invest in their combined sewer overflow program. So there are some creative things being done around the country, and it is something that we have to continue to drive in this country.
Ross.
Because he's a very smart man, that was my question, so I'm going to just pass the mic down.
Thank you for being honest.
Yes. I'm curious, I don't think I was daydreaming for a moment, about security concerns, securing your water. I mean, we've talked about climate, but what about more nefarious actors? Is this getting the attention it needs right now? And if not, how high is it on your sort of radar as, boy, this is a big concern that could come back to bite us?
Well, it is a concern, and I'll speak for what's happening here. You just can't walk into a water treatment plant. You can't be around reservoirs. They have their own police force, and so yes, it is being guarded. The wastewater system is being guarded to an extent also, but not to the degree of drinking water. So yes, it is. I mean,
it is huge, and EPA has requirements for vulnerability assessments and all those kinds of things that are being done right now around the country. But yeah, it's a huge concern. There are protections in place, but they don't cover every potential scenario like a intentional.
Cool. Sir.
We started a really interesting conversation about digital twins. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. For example, what is a digital twin? Is it a hydraulic network model on steroids? So if you could maybe explain one or two, and then comment on where you think it's going, because what I gathered from the discussion was that digital twins is a technology that's really taking off in the water industry. So what are some examples, and where do you see it going?
Sure, I can start with, there are examples, again, across the board, and we're seeing digital twins implemented in multiple facets, right? Part of it is for looking at operational efficiencies and how we model the potential operations, looking across your whole parameter. How do you figure out operational efficiencies? How do you figure out pump run times, energy usage, chemical usage, all of those kinds of things to model the optimum scenarios? In some places, it's being looked at from a flow perspective and looking at flow meters throughout your systems. We aren't quite to a position in the digital twin world, and I think to answer your question quickly, I think the definition of digital twin will be defined very differently by different utilities and different players in the industry. So I don't think there's a succinct definition in the water sector's mind right now. While some people may say it's just clearly this, it's being used so many different ways. People are looking at it different ways on how they make efficiencies in their system. So I wouldn't say there's a perfect definition. I'll turn it to you to say if you've got one, but I think it's constantly being looked at differently.
It also depends on the industry.
Correct.
You've got Brisbane at the moment who are using a digital twin of their railway line underground to use it for driver training. You've got Dublin who are using it for resilience around emergency by the fire brigade. You have Copenhagen who are using it for planning applications. So this is why I say this misconception that it's one solution that does everything. Right. It is an engine of parts that come together to give you that sort of vision.
Yeah, and then how do you take those parts and bring them into a more holistic picture of how to better optimize and manage your utility is where we need to get to in the future, and we're not there yet.
And it's also, for resiliency, emergency planning, scenarios, stress testing the system. If you have a digital twin of your whole collection system in your treatment plant, you can see how this is, what is gonna happen and what we're gonna have to do under this scenario. So that's another thing. And you mentioned training. Yes. Yeah. That's what we're hearing from some of our clients as well.
So, sir, would you give us your last question?
Hi. First of all, water is such an important cross-cutting topic. So, thank you guys so much for sharing this with, this PAN infrastructure group, and thanks to Rory and the team for bringing this to the agenda. You guys touched on the fact that water infrastructure is is largely reliant on ratepayers, government funds. And federal grants. So what opportunities or examples of success have you all seen on innovation in financing models where you saw some of the colleagues from transportation? Have there been success stories using P3s in this space, short of full privatization?
Very few in the water industry in the United States. Better success in Canada and other parts of the world. There's been a couple of P3s in the water industry. You can look at Santa Clara. You can look at back in the day Indianapolis, but you would say at some point that maybe that isn't a success story because they moved away from the P3 and sold the utility. It's really been an issue with political will. You've got examples like Bayonne, that's a P3, but there are very few good examples, and I think part of it is the concern about control and the political will around it, and we need to move the needle in that regard, because the biggest missed opportunity for funding in the water industry right now is there's hundreds of billions of dollars of pent-up demand from private financing and equity investors, the BlackRocks of the world, that would love to be in this space. But right now, with the way interest rates are and where things are from a funding perspective, the cost of return on invested capital just doesn't make sense when you can go to a tax-exempt bond market and get 2 to 3% interest, and you're going to pay 9 to 11% return on invested capital. Right before COVID, we were getting to like a perfect place where we were going to be able to actually get a lot of private investment and equity investment into this sector, and you were getting down to the 4s and the 5s percentages on return on invested capital expectations from some of the private industry and private investors. That's kind of disappeared right now. So hopefully that comes back in the next few years. But yes, most of it is born on the back of ratepayers, and we're going to have to find ways to do things differently to bridge that funding gap of $1.2 trillion. It isn't going to come from the federal government. Some of it hopefully will, but we're going to have to find different ways.
Lovely. Well, Please. Oh, sorry, Paul.
That's okay. No, I was just going to say that some of the opportunity is on the energy side of the wastewater treatment plants with the renewable natural gas, where you're seeing P3s where you can clean it, sell it back to the grid, to the energy utilities. And we're also seeing a trend of regionalized biosolids processing, where they would pay to get, to dispose of their biosolids. So those are the opportunities, but it is slow going. It is control. So it's a work in progress.
Some of the incentives are being removed.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Lovely. So can we have a big round of applause for the panel, please? So I'm going to call a quick 15-minute comfort recess. Please grab a coffee, swap over the last bit of business cards you want to swap, and then we'll come back for the last panel event. And we've saved the best for last, so it's worth you coming back for. Lovely. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.